Hey guys, I'm Siani.
I'm Kenny.
I'm Julian.
I'm Nada.
And I'm Jalen.
And you're now tuned in to That's a Wrap. Tonight, we'll be discussing Spike Lee's 2020 film, The Five Bloods, starring several notable actors, including Howard's own Chadwick Boseman. As we discuss the war drama, we would like to keep in mind the ways in which films help us to understand more about war and its consequences. Spike Lee uses several elements that we will discuss in detail to portray a specific message surrounding the concept of war and battle. So let's get right into it. Let's dive into a main component that can really determine the success of a film and the message it's portraying. Kenny, can you talk to us about the casting for this film?
Absolutely. So I'm Kenny. I'm going to talk to y'all a little bit about the casting choices in The Five Bloods today. There's about 5 or 6 main characters that really facilitate the plot that I want to talk about. And the first one of the biggest roles in the movie and one of the best performances, in my opinion, was Paul, who was portrayed by Delroy Lindo. I honestly think he should have got an Oscar for this. He's been in several other Spike Lee films before this, including Crooklyn and Malcolm X. So they already had a rapport and a relationship together. So that's probably why he got the role for this, even though he still deserved it. His character is one who feels like he's a leader, but he really isn't qualified to lead. Prior to the movie beginning, well, we don't even know about this until towards the end of the movie, but he killed the squadron leader, and that is what facilitates his whole entire character growth and deterioration that is for the movie. Since he killed his captain, Storm and Norman, he didn't tell any of his squadron members, and because of that, they have a strained relationship because of it. Paul is also a MAGA supporter, and since he's in an all-black squadron, that also has caused tension over time as they feel he's kind of more of an uppity Negro, just shucking and jiving, not really with them anymore. And throughout the movie, his character gives a lot of powerful soliloquies where he's just talking to the audience, kind of breaking the fourth wall, and you can really tell, like, this character is somewhere not good. Like, you can tell he's deteriorating, going down the hill. Like, he's not the same person he used to be. Like, this whole treasure hunt and this whole fact that he killed his squadron leader has really just done something to him and changed him. So next I want to talk about his squadron leader, who was Storm and Norman, who was portrayed by the late, great Chadwick Boseman. As you obviously know, Chadwick Boseman was in some other notable films, such as The Black Panther, of course. And obviously in that role, we see him in more of a superhero context, but in this, we got to see the more humanistic side of him, the more pro-Black empowered side. And I feel like this was a really good casting choice because even in the movie, you can see how upset he is about MLK's death and stuff like that. So he really embodies his real life in this movie as well. And this is one of the last roles we got to see him in. And in this film, his entire death serves as a catalyst for the plot. If he had never died and buried the gold, the characters would have never returned to Vietnam. Paul would never be going through this struggle. And Storm and Norman is just the reason that this friend group even exists and has stayed such a tight-knit family group over time. And then next we have David, who is Paul's son. He wasn't in the original war, but he still goes back with the friend group to Vietnam. Well, he doesn't go with them. He sneaks back, actually, which his father doesn't approve of. But David acts as kind of a bridge between his father and the rest of the group, because as his father distances himself from the group, David's kind of able to fill his friends in with, like, the fact that his dad is having night terrors, insomnia problems, all these other mental issues because of, well, at that point, they don't know it's because he killed Storm and Norman, but because of just, they think it's just general PTSD that they all experience. And David, in this role, this was really a good breakout role for him, but you might know him from other things such as Lovecraft Country. He's been getting a lot of good leading roles lately. And he really plays this role well. You can tell why other casting directors want him now. And then also we have Otis, who's portrayed by Clark Peters. You might know him as Lester Freeman from The Wire, which is where I first was introduced to him. That's another good thing I can say I really liked about this movie. It brought a lot of familiar faces that I knew from other contexts, and it brought them into roles that I had never seen them in before. Like, I'm used to more serious and other roles for them, and this is still serious, but I wasn't used to the military type role for them, so that was good seeing that. And his character, Otis, develops a relationship with a Vietnamese woman and has a kid with her. And that leads to strains with the group as they feel like they can't trust him. They feel like he's an outsider, that they betrayed him, when really he's just a man who wants to rekindle his relationship with his past fling and his new daughter that he didn't even know about. And his character has a rapport with Melvin, who's played by Isaiah Whitlock, because Isaiah Whitlock too was on The Wire. So you can tell the chemistry that they had from years ago there is still there now, because it's very natural seeming. Nothing seems forced in a relationship in the movie. Like, you can tell they're friends outside the fact. And Melvin's played by Isaiah Whitlock, and you probably know him from his most common quote of "she," which he says in literally anything and everything he's in. I think it's first from The Wire, but anything I've ever seen him in, he said it at some point. So it's funny seeing him say that in this. And his character, he's not even really that concerned with the goal that much. He just wants to go on a good vacation with his friends. Like, he just wants to have the gang back together type thing. And he even dies trying to save Otis's life, which shows like it was never really about the goal for him. It was just he wanted to reunite with his friends, go on a good trip, have a good time. So it's the same. He had to die for it because, like I said, the whole time he was really just trying to help out. Even when Paul was starting to go off the deep end, he was like still helping him with the metal detector, trying to find gold because he just wanted his friends to be together for old time's sake. Then lastly, we have Eddie, who's played by Norman Lewis. And this is the first one of them that dies on the trip. He accidentally steps on a landmine, and that's a very graphic and powerful scene because all the other soldiers see him explode in front of their eyes. And for somebody like David, who has never seen war before, is just a new son of somebody who's seen war, that really takes him aback because he's never seen nothing like that. So that is his first kind of experience with what the war is like, and he begins to kind of understand what his dad is like because of the things he's seen. He understands when you see painful, traumatic, graphic things like this all the time, it can do something to you. So all in all, seeing that death of Eddie, it's just very powerful for the group. Like, a lot of them want to mourn him, but Paul isn't so set on mourning him. He just wants to get on with it. So I feel like that's a very dividing point for the group, where you see the rest of them completely split from Paul at that point because he's just on his own other path. So I think all the casting choices were very good, and all of them played their roles the best they could.
Thanks, Kenny. So in order to have a film, you need a script. So Julia, help us digest the words that were brought to life.
Thank you, Siani. Before a film is brought to life, it has to start somewhere. And I feel like when it comes to the script, this is where basically all begins. Kenny touched on the actors that they're bringing into life, but prior to it being brought to life, it has to be brainstormed. It has to be put on paper, and there needs to be something physical. And this is when the life of a script is made. And within this movie is 154 minutes. So it's more than long enough. It's a very long movie, which means that there was probably pages and pages of the script. And one of the things that I thought was very interesting throughout the script is that it was very apparent that it was written by a Black individual, and it was produced by Spike Lee, but the writers had Black as well, because you could just tell how the main characters were speaking throughout the entire movie. Because the main characters are older Black males, for majority of the movie, you could hear like a Black Southern elderly hospitality. You could hear a lot of just choice of words, vernacular, slang, things such as that. It matched the perfect individual for that character, and they were all older Black men. So that was well on their part. And also another thing is that majority of the movie was being set in the Vietnam. There was a lot such as, flashbacks and things such as that, but it was taking place in the Vietnam War, and there was a disconnect between the Americans and Vietnamese individuals. There was a language barrier that caused friction between both parties. The Vietnamese people kept calling the Americans GIs and stating things such as, "You killed my mother, you killed my father, you killed my brother." So between the language barriers, they understood that. They understood that these were African Americans, and that due to past history that they did not like them. But also on top of that, there was also another language barrier when it came to the script, because you would see a lot of comic relief, because the black individuals couldn't understand them, and they couldn't understand the Black individuals as well. So there was a lot of comic relief and a lot of jokes being thrown around between the Five Bloods, and whenever there was four, things such as that. And then the last thing that I wanted to show with the script, the writers and Spike Lee focused on, was soliloquy. I know we'll more than likely talk about this later on in the film, when into like how it was cut and angled and things such as that. But soliloquy was used more than 2 times. There were full speeches when it was basically just him in the audience, and it was Paul, to be exact. I know Paul had two, and he did a soliloquy by himself, and he went into depth, and it was very great writing. It was very appreciated. It gave off Paul's feelings and emotions, and like Kenny had mentioned earlier, he was somewhat mentally off because of that grief, but it was just a great script and within the film that was much needed.
Not only does casting have a major impact on the vibe of the film, but also the location and the way in which the actors are dressed. So let's talk about the setting. So this film takes place during the Vietnam War in 1971, to be specific, and also in modern day Ho Chi Minh City, which is where they go back to vacation to. But it was filmed in Thailand, and in the beginning, there's very much a jungle scenery, even with the flashback scenes to the war, a lot of vegetation, which is appropriate for the desired setting, which is Thailand. And as I said before, it's set during the Vietnam War in 1971, which emphasizes the idea of how Black folks were viewed back then, especially being in a war. They weren't really viewed like the other soldiers. They were viewed as Black people first before being soldiers, which kind of the effects of that trickles down. You can see that even in the modern day, specifically when they're at dinner during like the first night of their vacation, and then the young Vietnamese boy comes to the table asking for change, asking for money, and Paul specifically speaks on how they were treated when they left the war and how nobody would ever have that type of empathy for them. So I thought that was interesting because the setting of the film actually really has a big impact on that feeling of the way in which the Black people were viewed, as opposed to just being regular soldiers and being appreciated. It wasn't more so they weren't being appreciated for being soldiers. It was looked at as more of an obligation, which is very important when we're talking about the whole idea throughout the film and the psychological aspect of it as well. So if we're talking about costumes, let's talk about who designed the costume. So the costume designer for this specific film is Donna Berwick. And one of the first things that stood out to me was a difference in color palette. So when they're first getting to their vacation, they're wearing like Hawaiian shirts. It's very colorful and it's very bright, and it just goes with their mood. You can see that they're all very excited to see each other. They're very excited to have this reunion and just to get away, not knowing what the journey is going to take them. But if you take a look at the flashbacks and different clips and even further into the movie, you see that color palette kind of change. So with flashbacks, you see the standard military gear, you see that army green, you see the combat boots, you see the cargo pants, you see all of that. But one thing I really wanted to note is also the difference, how the timing and setting also plays into the costumes, because they're not the regular army gear that we pay attention to today, that we imagine today. There was way less gear, way less protection. It was very much shirts, shorts, cargo pants, boots, and like their backpacks. You didn't see very much protection and armor like suits like there is today. But I also wanted to really touch on the color palettes, like I said, because that really emphasizes the vibes at different aspects and times of the movie. So specifically, I wanted to talk about also hats were a key part in this film. One being specifically Paul's MAGA hat, which was a very big aspect. It was very surprising for many viewers, but then once you get to learn Paul as a character, it kind of makes sense, and it even becomes ironic in a sense later when he's laying on the floor and the hat is sitting on his chest and it's dirty. But we'll get back into that. But hats are a major thing. Even when it comes to the setting, they had bucket hats, but when they had bucket hats, it was when they were in the terrain, which helps them to be protected from the sun. Like everything was very meticulous and it all made sense for the setting. So it's very important to note how the setting and the costumes were like cohesive. And I also wanted to talk about how Paul, not only does he wear the MAGA hat, but he has the signature bandana that he always wears on his bald head. He always has some type of head wrap on him, which I thought was something that was very distinct for his character. And overall, the biggest thing for me when in terms of the gear and the costumes, when it comes to the overall psychological ideas portrayed in the film, is just you can tell based on the color scheme and the color palettes in certain scenes what the vibe is going to look like and what those characters are feeling in those moments is very cohesive and it really makes sense. So we're going to talk more about the scoring in this film because that's also something that evokes emotion. So Naja, can you talk to us about the music choices?
Yes, thank you for the introduction, Tiana. And so the music in this film, it definitely helps to complete the mood. In the scenes, it helps to evoke strong emotional connections between the characters and the audience. And in this film, you can also see a bunch of parallels to different portions of the scene. So as we start in the beginning of the film, Inner City Blues by Marvin Gaye is playing, and it's playing while there are powerful images being shown, also powerful figures speaking about racism and violence, and they're also showing war scenes. And so with lyrics stating things like, "This ain't living," it just really shows how the film immediately introduces the set and sets the tone for the remainder of the film. It shows how it introduces the massive effect of the treatment of Black people in America. And so with that being said, as you move throughout the film, you notice that there's some similarities between the music choices. So for example, there's a lot of upbeat music playing during like the lighthearted scenes, during the scenes we're in the restaurant and they're partying. So in the beginning party scene, when the Bloods first reunite when they're on vacation, they're dancing to "Got to Give It Up" by Marvin Gaye. And this song is known to be like a fun-loving song. It's well known throughout the Black community and it makes you want to get up and dance. And similarly, when David goes on the date with Teddy, when they are in Vietnam at the time, there's a song playing called "Time Has Come Today" by the Chamber Brothers, which is also an upbeat song. It's a little more relaxing, but it's perfect for their meeting, for their first date, and creating like a lighthearted mood. And then in contrast, for the more sad scenes and the more serious scenes, there are a lot of minor keys and flat notes being played. And so those are manipulated to create more of a melancholy tone. And so during MLK's assassination scene, an instrumental was starting with a soft clarinet playing, while the audience watches the Bloods is shocked and disappointment to the reaction of MLK's death. It just helps to create and fulfill the whole scene. Similarly, later in the movie, when one of the Bloods, Paul, decides to venture off on his own from the rest of the Bloods, there's a quieter, like solo music playing with string instruments and minor keys to go along with his loneliness and helplessness. And finally, the movie incorporates the snare jumps to kind of remind the viewers of the characters' almost like sacrifice and somewhat of patriotism, even though a lot of the characters passed away because of it. Almost seemed like not willingly, almost seemed like they passed away due to accidents, due to other horror. But there are snare jumps that are played with instrumentals when Paul's son reads the letter from his father saying that his father passed away. And then the same snare jumps are played at the very end when they are speaking about MLK's death. So although the film is packed with different types of music, I would say that similar choices are grouped together to evoke similar themes.
Thank you, Naja. Jalen, can you talk to us about the camera work and all the angles that go into this whole production?
Definitely. So everything that's been mentioned so far, all of the characteristics tie back into the editor and director of the film. And this movie was directed by Spike Lee. So the movie first opens with a clip that meets the eye as vintage and dated. It's politically charged statements from Muhammad Ali from 1978, and he's talking about the war in Vietnam. He was a radical figure, so what he had to say was really prominent in the Black community, and his words were taken with very serious tones. So that kind of sets the precedence for the rest of the movie. And this use of vintage B-roll is a motif in a lot of Spike Lee joints, but it's done differently in Five Bloods, I realized. So the actual war images that are shown are still shots that appear on the screen without transition, which is pretty common for a Spike Lee joint, but there are no real transitions between the vintage B-roll or images. Everything is edited specifically with the music being played, kind of like how Naja mentioned. So captions would appear at the bottom of the screen thanks to the editor, and they would kind of let you know when and where those images were captured and what was kind of going on. But when it came to like the recreations of warlike scenarios that include the cast, they are transitioned, and in doing that, they use like a SPIA-esque filter to add the vintage element. So these war scenes are cut between the characters, and they focus primarily on Storm and Norman. And this editing strategy cues the viewer into realizing that it's not present tense in the film, but rather it's past. So much of the film seems to be captured on a steady handheld camera to give the illusion that you're moving with the characters. And the camera is either constantly panning, or it has a focal point with something important in the background moving, coming to the foreground. So in a lot of the scenes, like you would see what you're supposed to be focusing on, but you can't help but notice something in the background is going on. And eventually that thing that was distracting you is now your point of focus. And kind of how it was mentioned during the section of casting and also setting. There's use of light and color because it shifts the different emotions that you feel, the different colors that he uses, specifically the club scene in Thailand. Well, it was in Vietnam, but in the Thailand club, they use a monochromatic pink lighting, and that cuts back and forth between the characters as they're dancing towards the camera. And with that slow pan, it kind of feels like this technique is used to make the viewer feel as if they're in the scene with them, and it accurately does so.
Thanks, Jalen. So given all the things that we've talked about, let's talk about the psychological impact of the film, going back to the original question, which is how can films make us understand more about war and its consequences? So films can depict the reality of war, specifically this film, can depict the reality of war that some may not be able to imagine without visual representation. And films can also show the layers in terms of how many people were affected by the war, aside from those who are like directly involved. And films can bring humanity to soldiers, as we talked about with the characters and the casting. That has the ability to really bring humanity to soldiers into a story, bringing the story to life, allowing viewers to build a liking for these characters and even empathize with their experiences, so they really understand the realities of war, its consequences, and anything related to that. Anybody else want to have a take on that?
I would say I definitely agree with you. It did help depict like the realities of war that we don't think of sometimes. I know a lot of people, when they think about war, they think of either you make it out alive or you make it out dead. And a lot of them think if you make it out alive, like you're good, like you quote unquote won, like what you have to complain about, like if you didn't get any bullet holes in you and stuff like that. But I think this movie helped to show like war does a lot of internal and like intangible damage that isn't physical that you don't usually think about, especially on Black soldiers like this. You know, you're talking about they're going to fight an enemy that hates them, but they're being deployed by a country that hates them too. So I feel like this movie definitely helped bring light to me that, okay, like obviously I already knew that war was serious, but like it's no laughing matter at all. Like there's things from war that will really stay with you for the rest of your life, even if it's not a bullet in you. Like whether it be something you saw late one night, like it will really stay with you forever. So just when it comes to veterans, I'm thankful for them. I'm gonna be a little bit more patient with them because they definitely, it's some things that they've seen that I could never imagine.
Also thinking.
Yeah, for me, it honestly emphasis. I'm sorry.
You're good. I was gonna say, piggybacking off the Kenneth, I would say that through this film, we definitely saw like how realistic, or it came realistic, how the horrors of war are. And so I feel like just with the shootings, the landmines, just how realistic, like the bloody scenes, it was just very hard to watch, very graphic. And also, including like the different impacts in terms of like mental health. You can see that through all of their characters. But specifically with Paul, you could just tell how he was going through it, especially with Chadwick Boseman's character, knowing that he died right next to him. And so you could just really see the psychological impact through those.
What I was going to say was more so just piggyback off of what Kenny said, and really just for me, it really gave me an understanding of like really what PTSD is, and like clearly it's been a known topic. Just with Paul's character, like they all experienced it. They all had their ups and downs and just their psychological view on what they experienced at war. But when it came to, he accidentally killed one of his friends, and in his mind that always hindered him, and he never told anybody. He kept that to himself. So knowing that there's a lot of people that go to war, and there's things that happen out there that they never want to talk about again. They never want to relive. And just his character was just one example of an individual that made a honest mistake. He was trying to protect his country. He was trying to do the right, and he accidentally killed his own partner. And he took that to the grave, and he couldn't live with himself. That's why he was so ill. No, he's not the only soldier that's out there that has experienced that. And it really just, for me, it just gave me a perspective of PTSD, and really that someone can really go through when they're in that environment. Because like Kenny said, there's things that they've seen that we've never seen, things that they've, it's really like you just have compassion for individuals that's really in Paul's situation in real life.
Yeah, I can agree. There's a lot of war movies. The genre itself has a lot of stories, but I feel like this film kind of approached the stories in a way that hasn't been done before. And that's why it was so captivating. And I feel that the way that Storm and Norman gave forgiveness to Paul in the end kind of attests to what veterans may be searching for while they're kind of, they're back from combat, but they're still combating things mentally. And so that was like a representation of what I guess finding peace could be like. And it makes you think, like it's very thought inducing. So I thought that was an interesting aspect.
Yes, well, thanks everybody for your analysis. Thanks, Spike Lee, for curating this film. And thank you guys for listening. And with that being said, it's a wrap. Thanks, guys. See you next time.